I believe that in the 80s, you had fewer instances, fewer risks, a lot less safety concerns, and it was more about protecting, preventing loss from the few versus the many. I miss being an LP practitioner in the 80s because things were a little bit simpler back then.
Well, I can go from experience here, having managed in a department store environment in the Northeast. The typical department was between what we called 3 and 4 heads. A full head would be somebody that worked 40 hours a week, and you'd pepper in some folks that worked part-time so you could fill all of the business hours back in the day. And the mall hours, thankfully, weren't as long then as they are now, and they've actually gone through a shift over the last few years. But effectively, we had, between 3 and 4 people available to work at any given time. And our job was really to make sure that the store had at least one security person on staff during operational hours.
I believe the objective back in the 80s was for loss prevention to really catch the shoplifter, catch the internal thief in action. Whereas today, it's more about proactive prevention and ensuring safety for associates, guests, and the brand in general. Toolkit used back in the 80s included grainy VHS tapes, CCTV cameras, and a team of folks reviewing footage for hours at a time.
Yeah, and Jim, you don't want to forget the fact that we had what were called view booths or observation posts that would allow one of those people to sit in a high-risk area, observe customer behavior. At what point were they no longer a customer and they became a client of the loss prevention team? So it was highly intensive. We used to call it selective surveillance. And selective surveillance was, essential to the cops and robbers game we were playing back then. The other thing that was in our toolkit was we'd sit outside the store in the mall and make observation of folks walking into the store. And you could usually tell, all right, who's a shopper, who's probably not a shopper. And then you'd perform a selective surveillance on the people that you had a hunch about. And that hunch usually meant that they were in a group that looked like they were on a mission. And it wasn't shopping, it was shoplifting.
Back in these days, I was an alarm technician working on intrusion alarms. The technology, it wasn't what it is today. The motion sensors were, well, they could get set off. And when the fax machine came out and somebody sent a fax to the store, sometimes that alone would set off a motion alarm in the office. That's what I was doing back in those days.
It all depended upon the time of the year. Staffing was the biggest expense year in and year out. Whether you got an upgrade to alarms, the locks or any of those or guards were dependent upon the risk level of the store. If you were lucky enough to get a CCTV system, the first iterations were not very complex. It was maybe a dozen cameras in a store that's 100,000 square feet. And you had PTZs because they assumed that somebody would be actively using those cameras in real time, trying to observe from afar. And then you'd have to do a quick handoff from the camera system to active surveillance. So if you noticed somebody was shifting from shopper to shoplifter, you'd have to exit the office, try to maintain surveillance of that individual as long as you could, while you were transitioning from the back of house to the sales floor so that you could hopefully make a clean apprehension and not have to do any double checking on whether they had discarded what you saw them conceal on camera. The other thing was the cameras weren't they were pretty good resolution, but they were black and white. You couldn't tell color of merchandise. So having that ability to make a description in your report for what they took was dependent upon you getting to the sales floor as quickly as possible to make an accurate observation.
LP staffing was obviously the largest budget item because much was done manually back in the 80s. The automation that we take for granted today was simply not in place. From a technology perspective, if you were a retailer that had the budget and the foresight to put in basic version 1 EAS system or some type of anti-shoplifting tag technology, that tended to be a big capital expenditure, yet the ROI wasn't quite understood probably for another decade or so until those technologies became a little more prevalent and in almost everyone's toolbox.
Not everybody had CCTV systems, as Mike mentioned, but some of them had hold-up switches connected to a 35 millimeter camera. After the event, a technician would have to go out and visit the store, remove the film from the camera, take it to the photo mart. They were everywhere. Photo marts were everywhere. And, they were these little huts and say in the parking lot of a store, a pharmacy. Get the film developed. They would do it within 1 hour or less, and then get that film to where it needed to be, either the asset protection manager, police department. So those were the days when we would do things like that for our retail customers.
Well, I made a choice to choose a job in hotel security at one point, and it was about as mundane as you could get. You would watch a office tower or a convention center or respond to a noise complaint in a guest room. And then if you were lucky enough, you were able to drive the hotel courtesy van to pick up and drop off guests or flight crews because they made a lot of money off the airlines back in the day. When I started working in retail, one of the managers read my job descriptions in my experience and said, "Hey, listen, we're looking for somebody in our security department. Are you interested?" So I really think that would exist today, because a lot of times your past experience is going to help you translate into your future opportunity. I was lucky enough to have relationships within the management team that allowed me to make a choice to say yes to that loss prevention job and move into loss prevention in a department store environment. I think those still exist today, but it's a very different job today.
In the 1980s, I worked in several different retail environments as a store clerk, as a shelf stocker, and I always admired the loss prevention or security guard on site. The uniform was flashy. They had the opportunity to greet and say goodbye to everyone that walked in and walked out of the store. And some 10 years later, I had the opportunity to join an organization that provided loss prevention technologies. And it was really serendipitous that I had always admired the role of the physical security, of the physical loss prevention guard, and then was given opportunity to empower them with tools.
In 1987, I started as an alarm technician, equipped with a beeper or a pager, a phone card from the company, and a work van with a radio system inside of it, well before cell phones came out.
Well, this is where we start a transition process. I can remember being in my first job, and we had high shrink. And so the corporate team said, "Hey, listen, we're going to make an investment into your store, and we're going to install microwave EAS." We had an EAS system that was installed into the store, and that was probably the most high-tech thing we had from a theft deterrence. And this was the first time as a loss prevention person, I'm not going to say I was a professional at that point, but you started seeing the breadcrumbs of what investments look like, what the ROIs might be, and how they were going to change the way you worked, because now you had another tool in your kit. And that tool was, now you're watching somebody select merchandise. Now you're seeing them try to convert the merchandise, and you're waiting for the sound of them cutting the security tag off of the merchandise. That was another tool, because that showed intent, and that high-tech thing allowed us to be even more effective in our ability to show intent and then effectively either prosecute or arrest those people in real time, because you could pick up the breadcrumbs of the theft while trailing them through the store, because you could find the broken tag, you could find the removed price tags, all of those things as they were moving through the store. The other thing that was high tech back then was CCTV. So the first time you ended up with a color camera, it was really cool. And then the first time you got a covert kit that you could deploy pretty quickly was really cool and allowed you to start doing surveillance inside the store, which then helped you develop the ability to catch internal shoplifters. The internal shoplifters were far more damaging to the profitability of the business than the external shoplifters, because they had more access. They had the ability to aggregate what they were going to steal. They would stage it. And if you could discover where they were staging it, you could then put that covert kit to use and make a case happen. It was really interesting to see the evolution of those technologies. And you think about it, that's the first iteration of computer vision. And the AI in that case was the individual watching the video.
As Mike states, there were a number of visual deterrent solutions introduced into the 80s. I'll talk about a slightly different strategy which spawned off the solution, and that strategy was benefit denial. And a solution introduced in the late 80s was an ink tag. And this tag was placed on garments and had 2 vials of ink in it. And the concept was, if someone were to try to forcibly remove that ink tag, they would, in effect, be denied the benefit of the garment they were trying to steal. So, although quite simple in today's digital world, back in the late 80s, putting an ink tag into a retail store was really a lot of evangelistical selling.
And Jim, don't forget about the ones we used to put on the leather coats. So you would have either a loop, which was basically a lock that went through the arm of the coat so it couldn't be removed from the rack, or it was one that would actually alarm if somebody took it off the rack. So those were some interesting high-tech tools that were part of that benefit denial piece as well.
It's an exciting time for technology. We were transitioning from an intrusion alarm where you would arm with a key switch, where you'd have to get a green light. You might have 50 doors that you would have to ensure are closed, exterior, interior doors. And they might be on 3 separate zones. Sometimes they were all on one single zone. Back in those days, the alarm would go off and trigger called a tape dialer. We'd actually call the police department and repeat a message 3 times. The digital alarm communicators started to come out, and it enabled retailers to add more features and policies and functions to their business. We could zone out the store on separate areas. We could monitor these systems from a SOC, Security Operations Center, and we could monitor when those systems were turned off. If they were turned off too early, then we knew that they were most likely being held up at the store. If they didn't set the alarm in time, we knew that something could be wrong. So there were many, many, many advancements in technology back in those days, and it really, really benefited. It changed the policy of loss prevention.
The other high-tech item was the pager, the ability for you to be available 24/7. So we used the pager very effectively to communicate with the other security managers, where we would page them knowing they weren't anywhere near a phone when they were in the store, saying, I would send them a code and it would just be the store number. And the store number would be, all right, when I get to a phone, I'll call Mike, because he knew who was on staff that day. I would let him know that somebody had just left my store and probably was headed to your store, so they could be on the alert for him. And then I'd give them a description and they could tell me whether they had a positive interaction or hopefully not a negative one. That also helped us respond to those alarms Wayne was just talking about, which was you get a page in the middle of the night and you'd have to respond to the store. And on more than one occasion, we actually had an event. We had a fault. There were multiple faults. There was no point of entrance, but there were too many motion sensors that activated. And I can remember a couple occasions where we did a pattern search and discovered somebody had gone into a fitting room, climbed up through the ceiling, waited for the store to close, and then decided they were going to come back down and start stealing and then try to make their way out of the store. But the alarm activated before they felt comfortable doing so, and then they went and hid again. So we found people hiding on water pipes up in the ceiling on more than one occasion. I've been thinking about this since I read this, and I don't know if there's anything I truly miss. It was not an easy job. It was undervalued. There was a lot of standing around. But what I do miss was I can say I miss the adrenaline rush that we would get into when we knew we had somebody and you were about to make that apprehension. You had all 5 steps. You were approaching them and you would stop them. If you did it in a way that was respectful, usually there was no altercation and you could handle it professionally and in a business-like manner and protect the business, protect the people around you as you were making this apprehension and send them on their way in a way that didn't expose the brand to any negative feedback. And I miss that adrenaline. That now you get adrenaline in different ways. If you talk about adrenaline junkies, I'm sure there's a lot of LP people that would admit that that was a great adrenaline rush.
Yeah, Mike, I agree. And for me, the loss prevention team or the security guard standing around with not a lot to do but monitor traffic in and out of the store is a time long gone. I believe that in the 80s, you had fewer instances, fewer risks, a lot less safety concerns, and it was more about preventing loss from the few versus the many. And in today's environment, of course, the loss prevention, or should we really say the asset protection and safety professional, has many tools. And that, unfortunately, is due to the fact that the risk of loss is so very high. And to me, I miss being an LP practitioner in the 80s because things were a little bit simpler back then.
I'd say the key pieces of technology in today's loss prevention is the ability to use video and be able to see what's happening in real time and at a transaction level. We're talking about stopping the paper cuts as they occur as opposed to waiting for a huge loss to occur. Back in the day, we used to celebrate huge cases, huge, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And today, that's not celebrated anymore. We're looking to stop those things before they get to at a dollar level where it really hurts. And technology allows us to do that. So the real-time data we have access to, such as license plate recognition, knowing when somebody enters your property that's already on a list that we want to watch, or, having the ability to see in real time that you just had 40 items picked up and start moving across the floor because an RFID system can now see the shelf sweep in real time. Those are the things that are really cool that are helping loss prevention teams work smarter, not harder, and affect the shrink more quickly and avoid loss at many levels, both brand, personal, property, all of the above. So the technology continues to evolve, and I'm sure AI is going to help make them even more effective so that teams can concentrate on the most critical decisions while the automation takes care of the ones that they've always been responsible for.
So going from analog in the 80s to digital today, I'm not going to mention technology, but I'm going to mention the business partnership that our loss prevention and asset protection teams have with the many functional disciplines within a retail organization. In the 80s, loss prevention was a standalone group. They were store detectives. They were there to stop shoplifting. Today, every asset protection team partners very closely with operations, supply chain, procurement, sourcing, finance. The benefits that are driven through asset protection today truly impact the brand, the associates, and the consumers. And if that evolution didn't take place where asset protection became a true partner to all aspects of the business, none of the technology would have evolved to where we are today.
I think the up and coming technology today specifically is analytics, the ability to capture any scenario. Of course, this is AI that's powering this, but it's getting to the point where cameras are viewed 100% of the time, not by humans, but by technology. There's millions and millions of applications that could be developed and millions of problems solved with this technology alone. And it's just really started in the last few years, and it's changing on a daily basis.